welcome back to another episode of the Games Gone By podcast. I'm your host, Adam, and joining me today, as always, the gaming expert and enthusiast, Austin. What's up?
Hello, that is me, gaming expert and enthusiast. I am here and excited to talk about Wizards.
Yeah, so today we're leaning into the kind of under the radar aspect of our show. You know, we stepped away from the Games Gone By part for an episode to talk about a new Star Wars TV show, which doesn't really check any of the boxes, but that's okay. we love nerd stuff. But today I want to kind of get into that. When I think about games gone by, it's not necessarily ones in the far past, but sometimes it's ones that just kind of went by without a ton of fanfare. And so we're going to be talking about Tactical Breach Wizards, which was a game that you and I actually covered in our Steam Next Fest episode. So we kind of previewed a little bit. I know we were both very excited about it, but I didn't expect us to both buy it and beat it within a couple months of it releasing.
Yeah, this was definitely one that I didn't even know about until the Next Fest. Like, it was during that whole Next Fest thing. Uh-huh. I saw it, I was like, man, this is cool, and I want to check it out. And I think we both fell in love with that demo. And then when the full game dropped, it was like, this is an insta buy. Like, let's just do it. And man, you fell in love hard. I definitely really had a great time with it, but you have been gushing about this game for weeks now.
Yeah, it's like the second game I've ever 100%ed, so
and the only other one was because it was too easy.
Yeah, Spider-Man 2. But so much of the I want to say marketing, but it's not even so much marketing as just like the Steam store page and the descriptions and stuff were so engaging to me. Right? Like, I'll just read you the description of the game from the Steam store, and it's, quote, a turn-based tactics game in which you lead a team of renegade wizards in Kevlar as they unravel a modern conspiracy plot or find the most stylish way to punch a traffic warlock through a fourth-story window. I'd say no more.
What a, fascinating and just eye-catching description. And it really tells you nothing about the game, outside of, turn-based tactics, but, that's all you really need to know.
Yeah, and the studio, it's a small studio called Suspicious Developments. I'm pretty sure it's just 3 dudes in Britain. I had to do a lot of Twitter sleuthing to figure that out, so I'm only pretty sure. But their tagline is just, quote, we generally make games that encourage you to think of clever plans and or knock someone through a window. They have 3 games, and they call them the Defenestration Trilogy, and they have no link whatsoever other than in all of them you can knock people out of windows.
I think I'm going to have to go check out these other games, because who doesn't love a game where you can knock people out of windows? Yeah. Not only can you knock people out of windows, but it's the primary focus is to knock people out of windows.
You are heavily encouraged.
You can clear things in other ways, but why would you want to?
Yeah, there's even a final hidden achievement for defeating the last boss by knocking them off a building, because why would you do anything else?
Right, of course. Always knock people either off of windows or off of buildings or out of windows.
Yeah, but the the game itself, it kind of plays a little bit like a tactics game combined with a puzzle game. So it doesn't necessarily, if you think of something like XCOM, it doesn't have the randomly generated maps. It doesn't have the super deep character progression. Instead, it's a lot more focused on the characters and the narrative it's telling and making each mission a very self-contained, satisfying puzzle to solve through your character's abilities, rather than just, I'm gonna out-level this and take the best guns,
Yeah, I think when we were kind of talking about it, and as we were playing it, you at one point described the game as, what is a tactics game besides a puzzle game with multiple solutions? Yeah. And I think that is the perfect explanation, and it really encapsulates the goal of Tactical Breach Wizards, right? The whole goal is to come up with the most creative plan in every given little level, and I love how bite-sized these levels are. It's one room. It's literally every level is one room, and it's you clear 5 of them to beat a chapter. It's so quick to jump in, do a level, and it feels satisfying and rewarding to do it in the most creative way possible, and I love that about it.
Yeah, and the game, it starts off with a really neat tutorial, because your main character, or at least, I don't know if he ends up being the main character by the end, but one of the crew, right? His name's Zan, and it's showing you a little flashback, and his special ability is that he can see 1 second into the future, and this might sound a little useless on the surface, but given that this is a game in which you breach through doors into rooms and immediately begin combat, his ability to see a second ahead is really the lore reason that you can see into the rooms before you breach, right?
Yeah. Kind of, it's funny because the game, the sense of humor and the sense of just the tone altogether for the game is really sarcastic. It's like really witty at a lot of points. And there's this one great moment kind of leaning into that kind of silly powers thing is like Zan becomes so reliant on his ability to see 1 second in the future that there's like one point where he can't see in the future for a second. Like there's something blocking his ability. And he's like, what are we going to do? And one of the other characters is like, just look through the window in the door. And it's just really funny how like these abilities are kind of silly, but like they become so relied on by you and the characters.
Yeah, and like you said, the writing in this game is so great. It's kind of that British dry humor, but it's really witty, it's really biting, and it goes in a bunch of different directions I think work really well. You know, the relationship between the first two characters, you get Zan and Jin, is really goofy. There's a lot of jokes and kind of making light of the situation. But you eventually pick up a character, and we'll get to her in a little bit, who's like leading a revolution, and her story is pretty serious. And I think there's a lot of, we'll just say real world references littered throughout her story. But so you have Zan, and his abilities sort of take the form of time-based things and supporting the team, right? So you have a little bomb you can throw that makes players get an extra turn. You can set up a predictive shot that happens the next turn. So all of his stuff is about kind of manipulating that second of time to give your characters like extra abilities or predict where the enemy is going to be. And that works perfect with the character you get at the beginning with him, Jin, who is a storm witch. And all of her abilities are basically about using knockback to reposition things. And there's a chain lightning that knocks back multiple things, which is awesome. There's these grenades that knock you back and eventually give you more movement. So all of her stuff is based around repositioning, and all of his stuff is based around kind of supporting her doing that. So the first few levels with just them, I had a lot of fun with, because it's basically about how many turns can we give Jin in one round, right?
Right. And what I think works so well about that is that it introduces just those two characters for quite a while. Like you just have those two characters for several missions, so you really get the hang of how these abilities work, how like it encourages you to experiment with not dealing damage but moving enemies around to do the damage. And I think that's something that took me a little while to fully embrace, because I'm so inclined to shoot an enemy or just deal damage in some way outright. But the game really encourages you to, you know, push people out of windows or push them into a pit or like push them into Zan's predictive bolt or something of that nature. So the game really does a great job of building you into that mindset early on, so that when you get more characters later down the road, it is more natural to do so, and you can kind of combine all these really creative abilities.
No, I think you're completely right. And that one of the best things this game does is it just does a great job showing you how to use these abilities by giving you obstacles to overcome with them. And while like you can put points into things that increase a little more damage here and there, I think if you're just focused on dealing as much damage as possible directly, you're going to quickly find yourself unable to complete a lot of these missions, because it really is all about, you know, knocking things out of windows, knocking them into explosives, knocking things into each other, putting them in front of, you know, the next character you get's named Banks. She has something called Death's Door, where she can like open up these portals on walls. So then you start realizing, oh man, I can knock people through these portals and it kills them. And it's just every character brings something new that is maybe not obvious at first why it's so powerful, but the more you get into this system and the more you understand the puzzle-like nature of each level, you realize, oh shit, like this opens up so many possibilities.
Yeah, and one of the core mechanics that makes this all possible is the ability to rewind basically every move. Like every time you make a movement, you can rewind that movement if it doesn't work out the way you thought it would. Because essentially, I think kind of lore-wise, right, what you're doing here is you're like planning it all out, and like Zan's foreseeing it all 1 second later, so you can rewind if it hasn't worked right.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's kind of like you have a chance to try out all of these things before committing to it. And that lets you, I mean, I found myself rewinding often. Even if I could defeat an enemy, I would rewind just to see if I could do it better. Like,
oh yeah.
There were so many times, and the game really helps out with this by giving you optional objectives that I know you went all in on every single one of them.
I did.
But it gives you these optional objectives that are purely for like cosmetic upgrades. They're not required to beat anything, but they do encourage you to try different, more interesting things. So even if you don't get it if you're at least attempting it, it encourages you to try different strategies, which is really useful and natural.
Yeah, and I think the best thing about them is not only were they, just kind of optional, difficult things to do on top, but they were often kind of a hint in a certain way about what would actually be a really cool way to do this fight and a really effective way. So it even kind of just drops a little breadcrumb that's like, oh, what if I do try to destroy 8 explosive barrels before I end this mission? What does that lead to? And then you realize that in the process of destroying 8 barrels, you fuck everyone else up too. And so
you are destroying everything.
So I thought the optional objectives also worked great as just kind of a little bit of a hint at like, hey, if you really want to solve this the best way, like here's a road to start heading down.
Yeah, I think that is one of the greatest things about the game is how naturally it gives you tips and hints and progression, like all of the abilities that you can upgrade. Like it always does something a little bit better. It doesn't make it too overpowered, but like once you get into the next mission, you're like, oh man, like if I didn't have this ability, I couldn't complete this objective. Like maybe I can go back and respec my upgrades and get that ability so I can complete this mission objective. Like there's always little things that the game is constantly feeding you to make you better at it.
Yeah, and I think we'll just go ahead and keep going on with the characters a little bit here. There's I don't know how to talk about just one aspect of this game, so we're just going to merge everything.
It's okay. It's all right.
Yeah. So we have Jin Kellen, the freelance witch we've talked about. She uses her storm powers as mostly like a knockback machine. We got Zan Vesker, the Navy seer, who the guy who sees 1 second in the future. He's got all of the time-based stuff. We eventually get Dessa Banks, who is a necromedic, and that's a very funny character to me because she basically just discovers one day that she can resurrect someone, but only if she shot them an hour before or less. Not they've died, not she's killed them any other way. Only if she has shot them with this revolver in the last 60 minutes can she bring them back to life.
Which is just such an incredibly ridiculous thing, but it's so funny and leads to some really funny exchanges, as like this whole game does. But it's such a great ability, too, because it lets you, again, do some things that maybe you wouldn't, because you can bring your person back. It's like, okay, I can sacrifice Jin and do this stupid thing that's going to end up, like, blowing her up, because I can just resurrect her next turn.
And given how many bonus objectives are complete this without anyone dying, or really, it's not without them dying, it's with them still being alive at the end.
Right.
Yeah, that the gun resurrection really comes in handy. And I think also it's worth noting that it's really interesting mechanically because there's no other way to heal or revive in this game at all. So
yes.
The only way if someone takes too much damage for your liking, if you're not going to rewind, then you need to kill them and bring them back. So I really appreciated that aspect of it. She also has a couple of abilities that are just based around increasing the knockback on enemies, and also the death door thing we were talking about, which is really useful. And that plays well with the next character you get, which is Doll, who is a rebel riot priest. And she's this big, tanky riot guard looking thing. And most of her stuff involves like charging at things for knockback from like across the map, and also the ability to just teleport or swap places with teammates or enemies. And so when you start to see, okay, I can knock people into certain position, I can give Doll extra moves, I can increase people's knockback with banks or put a death door on the wall, and then in like one series of moves, Doll can take out 5 people by doing this and that. And it's just, man, it feels so good when all this comes together.
For sure. And the great thing is, again, like the way they introduce these characters, when you get Doll, they really set you up to start to learn how she works. Like all the enemies are in good positions to start utilizing her abilities, and like there's certain enemy types that she is better at tackling because they have more, health and armor, and her like giant hammer thing can deal a lot of damage, and her charge can position things really well. Like it encourages you to try out these characters, and I definitely thought Doll would be a character that I would easily gravitate towards. I was like, oh, big hammer, like a lot of damage, perfect. This fits my like super simple playstyle very easily. But I found out pretty quickly that it wasn't so simple. Like she didn't immediately click for me. And what I liked is learning, okay, how could I be more effective with her? And like, how could I utilize her swap ability better? And as you play through and learn all these things, you realize like how effective every character is in their own unique way. And Doll's swap ability very quickly became one of my favorite in the game, because it's just so cool to like oh, this guy's over here and there's no way I can get there in time. Swap. Now I can, take out another guy who's across the map who's going to shoot Zan or whatever. It's like, it's just so interesting to see how you can move these characters around with their different abilities.
Especially with the upgrade for her, where it's like when you swap with a teammate, it doesn't use mana.
That was just it's one of the first things I got, because then you're just swapping her around the map. They're just doing all kind of crazy nonsense.
Yeah, there's also the one where when you charge, if you hit something, you get to charge again for free. That was just amazing.
Yep.
Yeah, so you can really see how, with characters like that, how this can just snowball, right? Where suddenly you're spending one turn doing like 70 things that you didn't think were all going to come together, and it's great.
And that's what the game so often encourages, because so many of those optional objectives are like, can you finish this mission in 2 turns? And there's like 10 enemies, and you're like, there's just no way. And then when you start playing around with it, you're like, oh, I can finish this in 1 turn. Like
it was so satisfying to look at something like that and say, there is no way in hell I'm going to get this. And then 15 minutes later, after a gajillion different strategies, you're like, oh my God, I found a way to do this. It feels so good.
It is one of the most satisfying experiences in this game, and honestly in a lot of games. Like,
yeah, and I guess we'll mention the last playable character while we're here is
sure,
Rion.
Fine.
He's the druid hitman. He comes in toward the kind of like the back half of the game. He is originally kind of the main antagonist's henchman, but he kind of comes to your side at one point. And he has a variety of things he can do. He has this like impaling vine that pulls enemies toward him, and then can weaken their armor. He can also just straight up weaken their armor. He has a spore bomb that does a big area of attack and does more damage the more things that are in it, which was just so awesome to set up, getting 9 people in a spore bomb. And then he also turns into a rabid dog, which makes enemies go confused when they get bit, which is also really cool.
Yeah, that's such a random one. Like, he turns into a rabid dog. Like, the first time I saw that, I was like, wait, this guy can literally turn into a dog?
Right.
Like, what is going on? But that's just some of the goofy shit that's in this game. And I really like that for it. Like, it never takes itself too seriously. It really never takes itself seriously at all. Not to say that it doesn't have any emotional and affecting moments and darker storylines, but it never takes any of those so seriously that it is at a loss for comedy or a loss for lightheartedness.
Yeah, and it's just really worth noting how different all of these characters are in every way possible. Their appearance, their mechanics, their personality. I mean, honestly, I can't think of another game with 5 people that all feel as different as these do. So instantly lovable, and you're drawn to them very quickly. The writing is so sharp for each character that you get into their psyches and their literal anxieties. You actually fight missions through that we're going to talk about shortly, I'm sure, where you fight through their anxieties in a dream sequence. But you get into the minds of all these characters, literally. Yeah.
And you feel so instantly relatable to them. And I just thought all of them were really cool and compelling, and every conversation I wanted to have. And there was never a time I was like, I just want to skip through this. I wanted to listen to all of the dialogue, or I guess it's read all the dialogue. There's no voice acting.
Right.
But I wanted to read all of the dialogue. I wanted to hear what each character had to say, because they always had something interesting to say, and something you're just drawn to them. There
are these optional side conversation scenes that can happen.
Oh my God. They're all so good.
And I remember first looking at that and being like, yeah, no thanks, because it's just not typically the kind of thing I'm going to go for in a game. But I read the first one, and I was like, okay, now I wish there were more, because there's only about 4.
I know. There's so few. I was kind of disappointed by that, because the ones that are there are so good.
Yeah, there's so much character development and exploration that goes on in these little side conversations. And it's not really a branching dialogue system. There's occasionally times where you can pick an option and the person's response will be a little bit different. It's not really trying to be like a Mass Effect, though, right? But it does give you just enough kind of flavor with the characters to say something that you think they might in that moment or might not, and then the characters kind of respond to it. But it all sort of feeds the same journey and the same development that the characters are going on, right? You don't really get to make a ton of narrative-changing choices, but I had absolutely no issue with that. The game's not meant to do that, and the narrative it does tell is just amazing.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, and I think a lot of that is kind of anchored on its main villain and your main quest that you're taking on, right? The story kind of involves your Zan's former commanding officer, Liv Kennedy, who is a chronomancer. Just time. Like, what is her exact ability, Adam? I don't remember it's just, she's just like super fast, right? Like, what is the exact ability?
It basically says that she can move on a different time scale as everyone else, and that basically takes the form of, being able to be anywhere she wants in a split second, being able to get through any combat in a split second.
Right. It essentially makes her like invincible. Is the idea
yes,
she is positioned as like this impossible threat to stop, and we find out pretty early on the idea is that she is leading this group
Reactor,
who's doing some pretty messed up shit. Especially when you look at like what happens in the first mission of the game.
Yeah, so I don't want to get into the story like too beat by beat, particularly because if you are listening to this right now and haven't played it, just go play the damn game. It's so good. But
there's a lot of twists and stuff that I don't think we should spoil here because there's some really good stuff, but like some general summary is probably good.
So the tutorial mission, which is also just an incredible tutorial mechanically, kind of sets the stage. And in the past, Zan worked under Liv, and they're on this operation where they're trying to rescue a hostage. And you get it kind of shows you up to that point how powerful she is, because basically she'll be like, "What's in this next room?" He's like, 3 riot priests. And she's like, fine, I'll leave you one. And she just like goes in, instantly kills 2 of them, and then is just like, "Here's your target practice." So it does a great job setting up just how invincible she is. And then you get to the final part, and basically you have a hostage that's about to be shot, but then you have some weird creature that's abducting Liv. And it kind of introduces you the rewind here, because it's like, hey, see if you have time to save Liv and save the hostage. And it turns out no. Then it's like, well, okay, then I guess like I have to make the decision to save the hostage, and Liv gets kidnapped, because Zan's like, that's the mission, right? And so this happens. He ends up getting dishonorably discharged based on this mission. And then years later, Liv appears again out of nowhere. And this time she has a whole private military behind her that are now gone rogue. They used to kind of be contracting with, there's a DSR, I forget what it stands for. It's the something republic, but it's kind of like your United States in this world. And they're using this private military organization for years. And then suddenly it just goes rogue, right? So now they don't know who's controlling them. Liv's working for it. That she's trying to gather large concentrations of mana. You're not entirely sure her motivations, but it's no good. And Zan is like, well, I feel like I'm obligated to help stop this somehow. And Jin's like, ooh, I need a job. I mean, the whole beginning, she's trying to be a private investigator, and she won't stop talking about it, but she has like no work. So
she's like the worst private investigator ever.
So she's like, oh, hell yeah.
Her literal first client ends up dead. Like, it's just, she's not very good at her job. It's fine.
And in the process of trying to, I think Jen even gets Zan to like, oh, can we just try to get this person I was trying to interrogate? But then it turns out that like, did Dessa kill them, right? Banks, right before you get there, and she like refuses to resurrect them or something.
Yeah.
I can't remember how all that plays out, but eventually you convince Banks to join your side.
Yeah, because Banks is working with Liv.
That's right.
At first, not necessarily voluntarily, it feels like, but
oh yeah, and you find out that the reason Liv wanted Banks is because she needs her to kill her like every hour. Banks killed Liv.
Yeah, because she's like slowly deteriorating.
Yeah,
and like her mana or her power is like slowly eating away at her, basically.
And so without Banks, she basically feels like she's going to get worse and worse. So she keeps having her like reset that hour, which stops the progression of the disease. She's none too happy that you take that away. But
yeah, it makes for a pretty angry antagonist. And Liv is kind of the core of this whole, like, she's the driving force of your group, and everybody has their own like personal or just militaristic, I guess, vendetta against Liv. Like, everybody's kind of got a reason to be after her and after this group. And that's kind of the driving force of your plot. And there's some good twists and stuff that I don't want to get too into, but it leads to some really great story moments. I was actually really impressed and surprised by the story itself. I always, from the very beginning, I could tell the writing was strong, but the actual story beats and the twist and like the narrative was also pretty compelling.
Yeah, and up through this point, it definitely tackles some serious tone and topics with Liv being what is essentially like a super terrorist. But I think it's really when you get Doll, and she's the rebel riot priest. When you get to her, because you eventually go to her continent or country, whatever it is. I think it's called like Canal, and it's sort of been taken over by religious zealots. And she is leading a secular revolution there, right, to overthrow these religious zealots. And her character is basically doesn't get any moments of joking around. I mean, she is like super serious, and it's super compelling too. And you can tell, I think, based on the fact that like some of the dates they talk about begin with 19. Some of the stuff they talk about with being like the religious right. I think there's some real world comparisons going on here.
I would think that's fair to say, yeah.
I don't want to say with absolute certainty, but I do think this is basically they're like, hey, we're not going to preach at you with all 5 characters, but maybe one. And
yeah, at least Doll can be a little preachy.
Yeah, and Doll is definitely preachy, but I think it works so well because all of her character is inside of that revolution that she's been living and breathing since day one, and she's super against these. Now's a good time to bring up the map screen. Basically lets you drag characters and locations around like it's one of those conspiracy boards with the red lines, and that is freaking awesome.
It leads to so many funny moments too. There's so many like funny quips and like little writing things if you read it all that are like, so they're just snarky and like cute, and it's like, yeah, that's a little detail that you didn't need to put in, but when it's there, it always gets a good chuckle, you know?
Yeah, and what's cool is Jin is mostly the one writing it, but then all the other little characters will come in with their little notes if it's something that they know more about. And my favorite one was there's the one for the chapel, which is the crazy religious zealots in Doll's home country, right? And at one point, Jin describes them as like far right takeover, and she draws a line through it and puts literally fascist Jin. There's just little things like that. That are just it's so well done, and it kind of happens in between the 4 chapters is really when you do most of this dragging around. So it kind of summarizes all the missions you've done in that chapter. It really lays out the key characters. If it had been less than a month ago that I played this game, I probably wouldn't remember everything. Because like it's just a great summary, and it's interactive, and it builds the characters with all their little dialogue and quips with each other. One of the coolest like lore screens of any game I've played, for sure.
And it's really in character for Jin to be doing this too.
Yeah.
Like it's very much her style to be like, let's put out a big map and a conspiracy board and like literally draw lines to everything. Cause it's just, she has that like that spirit of that PI, like ambitious kind of bubbly, like I'm gonna do this kind of mentality. So it's so funny to see her kind of spearheading this, like, we need a conspiracy board. Like, it's so interesting how well I think this one works, because there's a similar mechanic in Alan Wake 2, and it was much more of a drag to do it in Alan Wake 2 though, because it doesn't have the same like lighthearted tone. It's taken so much more seriously and so much more dramatically that it's like, obviously, right, that fits for Alan Wake. Like you don't want it to be too goofy, but it's so much harder to get invested in it because it's like, who's the super serious criminal? Like, let's sit down and think about it. And it's just like, this is so lighthearted and fluffy that like you want to engage with it because there's always a funny little quip or something to be said. So it's something to say about the writing and how tight it is that it makes you want to engage in this conspiracy board.
Yeah, I truly read every line of dialogue, every note in the map screen. If there's words in this game, I processed them, right? And I'm usually not like that in a lot of these games. You know, I've played Mass Effect 7 times. I've never read through the whole codex. Like, what? Are you kidding?
Has anyone? If someone's read through the entire codex, please give me a call. You need help.
But this game just strikes the perfect blend of that humor with the serious topics, and it's all paced so well. This game, everything it does is paced perfectly, whether we're talking about the rate you get new abilities or new characters, or that you're introduced to new locations, or you get new enemy types, or the way the story progresses. I mean, it's all just beautifully paced out.
I would definitely agree that that's one of the highlights of the game, is just how well it feeds you either story, character, gameplay, mechanics. Like everything is given to you at the rate that feels natural and comfortable. It's never overwhelming, but you never start to get bored where you're like, I need more, like I need more of something, because as soon as you start to feel that way, it's there. You have the more of something. Like a new character will show up, or you'll get a whole new enemy type that you have to completely rethink how you go about dealing with them, or you get a great story twist that like, okay, maybe the gameplay was starting to feel too samey, so like they hit you with a narrative twist that was like, whoa, now I'm back in. Like it is constantly giving you some new stimulation, and it does it really well.
Yeah, and the last character, Rion, he comes in kind of halfway through the game. Liv is trying to secure some supply of mana, I think. You eventually find out what she's trying to do is basically destroy all the mana reserves on the planet except for the one in the nation she's about to go invade, so that she controls the world's entire mana supply. And mana in this game mechanically like powers your abilities. And then lore-wise, I think, it just allows people to do magical things.
Yeah, I think they're trying to make like super soldiers with the mana. Like they're trying to like inject people essentially with this and make like super soldiers.
They're trying to create more lives, essentially.
Yeah, more like completely unstoppable threats.
and she kills Rion when he tries to backstab her, but of course he can't because she moves at the speed of light. And but you resurrect him with a pistol necromantic, and then he basically decides to join you because he wants his revenge. So we've got all 5 characters at that point. That's when the game really opens up, because there's some levels that just with everyone's abilities you can do just obscene things. That might be the best way to describe it. And yeah, I'll leave the rest of the story open-ended. I really would encourage anyone listening to go play it. It's really great. The final boss battle is so fucking cool, because basically what Liv does is so if you try to attack her, she immediately, before the attack goes off, switches positions with the nearest object or ally of yours that was not the one who fires the spell. And so at first it makes it really hard to hit her. You're like, well, I can't knock her back because she just swaps with this explosive barrel and I end up knocking the barrel away. Or she swaps with my teammate and I end up knocking them off the ledge. But as it's like every couple rounds, you'll get another teammate coming into the battle, and you start to realize there's all these little things you can do to confuse her. So it's like, okay, yeah, she'll swap place with the barrel. So what if you set it up to where once she swap places, the barrel flies at where she is now standing? Or, hey, what if I have her swap with one of Zan's little projection images, and then the bomb goes off, right? So you start to realize there's all these little things you can do to actually make her take damage, and it's immensely satisfying because you have to kill her like 5 or 6 times before she like runs out of lives.
And every life she gets a little bit harder to kill.
Yeah, so
it's like you have to come up with a new, even more creative way to figure it out.
And it's really awesome. I mean, truly one of the best final boss fights I've ever seen, as far as like how it actually forces you to engage with all the game's mechanics and at a higher level, right? You probably can't keep doing the strategies you've done all the way up to this point. Like, you're gonna have to come up with something new.
And that's one of the things that I think the game does so well, is that like throughout all the optional objectives and all the things that it's kind of fed you so far, it's forced you to think outside the box and forced you to try different strategies and different attack combos and patterns and using different characters together. So when you get to Liv, now it's like taking all of that stuff that you've practiced, all those things that you've tried, and now it's like you have to figure out how to use that stuff so optimally that you can beat the unbeatable person, right? It's like, this person can't get hit. How do you force them to get hit? And it's so interesting because, kind of like we were talking about earlier, the optional objectives in this mission is really just like, use a certain ability to hit Liv. Like that's every optional objective for every character is use one of their particular abilities to hit Liv. And so it's like, okay, now I just need to figure out how I can make that ability hit. And doing that through all of her lives was one of the most satisfying experiences I've had in a game in a long time. Like, just figuring out the perfect combos, the optimal way to hit her. I was like popping off every time. I was like, yes, let's go. Every time. It was like midnight, like my girlfriend's asleep, and I'm just like, yes.
And it's honestly, it starts off so discouraging, right? Because you only have Zan, and one of the things you realize early, so he has this spell called Predictive Bolt, right? Which is like an Overwatch, and yeah, at this point you would have used that oodles of time up to this point in the game, because it's so easy to set it up and like knock people into it, so it activates that current round instead of the next round, and then you have an ability with him where if he hits one thing, he can do it again, so you can just get tons of Overwatch shots. Well, you do that on her, and she literally ducks under it and taunts you. She's like, dude, I'm not falling for that.
That made me so mad. I was like, I thought I had you.
And then you find out if you stun her first, she can't duck under it.
Yes.
So you start to realize, all the things you can do with that. Dude, it's such a good fight. I probably could talk about it forever.
It really is one of the best fights. I know you did it several times to get like all the achievements tied to it. I only got to do it once. I literally finished it last night, but it was very satisfying to complete. I was very impressed. Like, final bosses can always be hit or miss, and you fight Liv earlier in the game too, and it's fight is maybe a strong word to use, because it's really like run away, hide, escape at all costs. like it's such a massacre for Liv fighting you, and this time it felt so rewarding to be able to figure her out. It's like, you know what you did to me last time? Like, not even close this time. Like, I got you. Like, I've got your number. I've figured you out. And I then defeated you in this final mission that really puts all of your skills to the test. Super satisfying.
It's a true power of friendship moment without feeling so lame, It's...
Yeah, it really is. That's a funny way to put it. And to kind of go to that, right? Like, the credits of this game is even like a really cool, unique experience, because as the credits are rolling down, you kind of get to see what happens to all of your characters at the end of the game. You get to kind of see, and it's not just see, you get to choose like what you think they would do by going back to your map conspiracy board and like basically making a choice. Like, what would this character do now that they've completed this mission that they're on? Like, what is their resolution to their story? What is their future? And I thought that was a really cool way to round this all out.
And all of those choices almost take the form of either like continuing to fight the good fight or just accepting the fact that like you've done enough. Because, like Zan can retire or like train the country that's getting taken over by Liv. I forget what it's called. Medill, I think. That's basically
Medill. I think it's Medill.
Yeah, so you end up working with their rebels a lot toward the end of the game, because you're basically, they saw the invasion coming and we're just playing nice with the zealots the whole time. And once the invasion actually starts, they're like, yeah, we were ready for this, fuckers. And you kind of join that resistance. In those last few moments with the credits, you're basically like, okay, is Zan going to retire or go train more resistance fighters? Is Dahl going to like stay here and fight or go back home? Is Liv going to open up like her own detective agency or keep working with the rebels? So all of it, and neither of them are made to feel like their own choice or that these people there's something wrong with them for not wanting to make a certain choice. All of it is like they earned whatever ending you gave them.
Yeah, I thought that was a super nice way to wrap it up without even like you said. I think one of the most interesting things about it is that it doesn't make you feel one way or the other. That neither of the options feel like this is the way that you probably should go, and it like nudges you in that direction. Both endings for every character make a compelling argument as to like why you should maybe pick this one. And some characters I was like, yeah, go off and retire, man. Another character was like, no, I think you would fight the good fights some more. Yeah. Like it really felt natural to just pick and choose each one, and it wasn't like you had to align them all one way or the other way, and it felt like everyone had a satisfying ending no matter which way you picked, which is really impressive for a game with like multiple choices like that.
There are games where, like, I love Mass Effect 3, so I don't want to shit all over it, but that you're really left without a lot of closure on what most of those characters are up to after that game, particularly before the director's cut, right?
I'm about to say, after the extended cut, I feel like you get a little bit more closure, but yeah, that original ending is like, I guess they're somewhere, maybe, could be dead.
This, to me, has like one of the best in sequences for a big cast since Final Fantasy VI. Like, I really think it's that good.
One of the reasons that I think that ending works is that the cast never balloons. Like, it always stays small. You have your 5 main people and a few antagonists. We didn't even talk about most of them, like Steve Clark, the traffic cop.
Steve Clark.
His whole bit is just that he's completely useless. Like, I love it. Like, he does nothing. He's never useful for anything. He's the best.
Doesn't he literally start off as just like a bureaucratic nightmare for Jen? It's just like a DMV worker
yes.
that she couldn't stand. And somehow he ends up in like the cadre of the final boss.
Right. And he's just like sitting there, and he just like summons cars to attack you that are so easily avoidable that it's kind of a joke.
Yeah.
It's one of the best. It's one of the best bits in the entire game, literally down to the point where one of the optional objectives are just like, don't even bother with Steve Clark.
I love that so much.
It's so funny.
Any other game would have been like, eliminate Steve Clark, eliminate your rival, whatever. And this one was like, don't even give him the time of day.
Right. He's so useless. But right, even that, like, we're talking about the like kind of side one-off villains that show up like once or twice in the game because the writing is so sharp and the cast remains so small. By keeping everything so tight and like compact, you never have to like keep track of 100 different people or all their backstories, everything. You only have this little small core group, and you can kind of get invested in that core group.
For better or for worse, I'm going to keep using Mass Effect as a measuring stick for everything. And
which is such a weird measuring stick for this game, by the way. I hope you realize that.
It is, but it's just because they're now my two favorite games ever made, so it works. But I was just going to say, like, Steve Clark is a more engaging antagonist in one scene than Kai Lang manages to be across the entirety of Mass Effect 3. So
as soon as you said more engaging antagonist, I knew this was going to be a moment to show on Kai Lang.
There's always a moment to show on Kai Lang.
He really is the worst. He's truly useless, and the game doesn't make a joke out of it.
Yeah, he kills about as many people as Steve Clark does, but you're meant to fear him. One of the other henchmen I really liked is this guy named Bori Kresh, and he's the less lethal pyromancer. And the note for him is funny because Jin's even like, I have no idea how to describe this. And Zan's like, I got you. And he's like, basically, he has fire that can get really hot, but not hot enough to incinerate you. So he can summon flames, but they can't exceed a certain temperature. So he's like, they're more likely to make you pass out from heat stroke than actually incinerate you, which is just so funny.
It really is great, and it's so funny how all these characters end up being like really important towards the end in ways that you wouldn't really expect. You
have to detonate some mana reserves in one mission toward the end, and you have to get Bori to like fling his not so hot fire into them to blow it up. It's great.
Yeah, there's just so many great little moments with all of the cast, even the villains and like the antagonists that will make you laugh and just like put a smile on your face, and the whole game really does just put a smile on your face the whole time you're playing it.
Yeah, except for the really sad and introspective moments, but
right, which are all the like anxiety missions. Like,
yeah, now's probably a great time to talk about those if you want to, because I know you really enjoyed those.
So one of the coolest things about these anxiety dreams, right, is like you literally get into the mind of the character. You go in, and both mechanically and narratively, they provide something really interesting for each individual character. Like Jin is one of the first, I think the first one that you get.
Yeah.
And it basically deals with like her self-loathing, her insecurities, her inabilities to really succeed at most of what she tries. Private investigating. It feels like she's like worried that she can't ever succeed. And to like manifest this, you get two Jins in her mind, like, and you have to clear these rooms with just Jin and like doing different combinations of things with just Jin, whether that's like throwing people out of windows or whatever it might be, right? And each character has their version of this where they deal with their insecurities, but mechanically you're doing something unique with just that character, but like two versions of them. And I thought this was a really cool way to, again, test your abilities and test your skills, but in a different way than before.
They really are just a shining example of this game's, like you said, both the writing and the mechanics, because the conversations they have with their sort of inner self or past self or future self, whatever it ends up being, are really revealing and really gets to the core of some of their insecurities. You know, you talked about Jin's. Banks is funny because she basically always tries to pretend like she's just in this for the revenge or the money and she doesn't care. But then you sort of, as she's talking to her past self, who's like, hey, whatever happened to that idea you had to scheme rich people out of money by giving them, quote, life insurance, as in like, or really like death insurance, right? And she's like, I wanted to do that, but then the math didn't work out. And so, what do you mean the math didn't work out? And she's like, I realized that I was saving hundreds of people's lives by using my power as often as I could and not like gatekeeping it. And I just don't think if I could live with myself if I did that scam. And you're like, wow, Banks would have never said that out loud to any of the other characters, right? But this anxiety dream just gives her that avenue to do it.
Right, like all these characters put up walls and act a certain way on the outside, but when you get into their heads, you actually see the people that they are, and they're not bad people, right? They're not perfect people, but they're not bad people, and you can kind of see the story explore that side of them that they don't want to reveal to the rest of the cast. And like Ryan is a good one because he puts up this exterior of like, I have no friends, I hate everybody, I'm only in this for money. And like when you get into his anxiety dream, you see that that's the thing that he struggles with the most, is like the loneliness, the like lack of companionship, but mostly his lack of trust for anybody. He doesn't trust anybody, and he can't let himself trust anybody. And so you get to kind of discover why that is and kind of go into his story. And those things are really cool, and it does it in a way that is really satisfying.
Yeah, and a lot of these have little character twists that I don't really want to spoil, but they're all really good. And like you said, mechanically, it's great because, you know, what's better than one freelancing Storm Witch? Two of them, obviously, right?
Yes.
So getting to double up on all the characters is great. Zan's is really funny because his character actually shoots you as a reaction anytime you're in range and make an action. So you have to, or it's like you shoot the image and the image shoots you or whatever. So you have to plan that out even more carefully than the rest. Really some of the highlights of the game.
Which like caught me off guard so bad the first time it happened. I was like, why did I just shoot myself?
Yeah, and it turns out the whole thing's because like Zan's alter ego is actually the dick he's afraid of becoming. And so at the end of that, like Jen interrupts his dream and it replaces the other Zan, and it's like, don't listen to that guy. Like, he's a dick.
And Zan's like, wait, how'd you get into my dream? Like, is there no privacy in dreams anymore? Like,
yeah, man, I just don't even know what there is else to say about this because I don't want to spoil too much for those listening, but I also could just talk about this game all day. I mean,
it really is a short game. Like, it's not too short, especially if you're trying to do everything, like all of the optional objectives, all the optional like dream missions and everything. Like, if you're trying to do every bit of content this game has, like, there is a good bit to get out of it, but it's not really that long of an experience if you're just trying to like kind of go through the main story. So I don't think there's too much more to say, but it's like, it's so snappy and so like quick to finish. Like it's definitely worth going pick up. It's like $20, I think, on Steam. One of the best games you'll play this year for sure.
And it really does let you approach it how you want to. Not only in the sense of there's a bunch of options, you know, in combat, but like the difficulty settings are very granular, so you can control very little specific things about it. You can choose whether or not to do those optional missions that are bonuses. You can skip levels entirely and come back. You can come back with the same party or a different party. You can come back with more abilities. The game really, like, I played it kind of hardcore, right? I kept the difficulty on normal, but I said, no, I'm going to hit these optional objectives first time through the whole way through. But I know there's people.
You did.
No, I did. But there's people out there that did the same thing, but had the difficulty every category turned all the way up, which was just too much for me. It's shit like the enemies get 2 actions per turn. They have more health. They do more damage. The game was already hard enough to hit all the optional objectives on the first go without that. So I kept it normal, but you can. I mean, there's so much flexibility in how you play the game. You can't really do it wrong, I think.
It's a perfect game for people who like maybe are intimidated by strategy. They're like, oh, like I don't like strategy games, or I'm scared of strategy games, or like they're too complicated. Like this game really dumbs it down, but in like a great way. It just makes it a more focused experience. It makes every mission kind of self-contained, and you don't have to worry about like a tremendous amount of continuing progression throughout the entire game, whatever. Like there is that element, but it's not the focus. Every mission is focused on what is this one room and how can I complete this one room. And by narrowing that focus so you know, granularly, it makes you appreciate the moment-to-moment gameplay a lot more.
I wish I could remember the details of this one mission, because to me it just illustrates all this so well. But it was one that it starts off with like, it's a doll mission, and it's blow up like 12 barrels or laptops or something before the first turn, and it just on the surface seems impossible. Like you're looking at it and you're like, dude, there is no fucking way. But after I banged my head against the wall for 90 minutes and kept trying everything I could think of, I eventually started to see the breadcrumbs they're laying out, right? And it's all about like using that swap when you're supposed to and not wasting your bonus charges. So some of it definitely, I don't know if it requires you to have certain abilities, because I was able to do it on the first time through, but I also may have just picked like all of the abilities they wanted you to. I don't know. But yeah, I can't say enough good things about this game. If you like very tightly, not AI generated, not procedurally generated, very purposely designed levels with very unique mechanics and unique characters that navigate through these levels and all kinds of solutions to any given problem, I can't see how you won't like this game.
If you like all those things, but also like it with like a lot of wit and charm and like just genuine like joy, this game gives you that too. Like there's just so many funny moments and so many like moments where you're gonna sit there and laugh while also playing a really mechanically deep and interesting game. It's really the best of both worlds.
That's so true. It strikes everything it tries to do. It strikes the perfect balance of, right? It's the perfect balance of like goofy and witty with a serious story. It's the perfect balance of like being a puzzle game but also being a tactics game. It's the perfect balance of being a good looking game while still being stylistic and nothing like, super high def graphics, right? I don't think the characters even have mouths half the time. But
no, they're just, but it all looks really good because it's also heavily stylized.
And they're so memorable. Like there are, if you, I hate always shitting on certain games, but like Starfield, if you go play that game and you realize after the first 20 minutes that every character you have looked at looks exactly the fucking same, except their hairstyle was just like one of 6. Like this game isn't like that at all. Despite the fact having 1/1000th of the detail and processing power that something like Starfield has, every character is so memorably designed and so visually unique the second you see them.
Yeah, the character designs are fantastic. All the like bonus outfits you can get are great. Like there was some that I locked into pretty early on, and like as I completed the bonus objectives, which unlocked the like points to unlock the costumes, I was like, I want that costume. Yeah. And I would get enough points for that one and I'd unlock it and I'd be like, perfect, I am set. And I'd rock that costume for the rest of the game because they just have such a like striking detail. It's like, bam, it just really hits you.
I really liked the Wiz Tac set.
Yep, because I got that one.
It was really the only one where they all kind of matched, or they didn't match, but they kind of had a similar aesthetic. Because the whole idea is it's if these characters were true like military wizards, this would be their gear or whatever, right? So I liked that set a lot.
Doll's like final one, the Ascender or whatever, was so cool looking. Mm-hmm. Like just the like stuff like coming out of her back, and like I loved Ryan's like a mafia boss looking like white suit, like his like full white suit looked really cool. There's just some great design decisions and great aesthetic decisions. It's really the type of game that only a small indie studio of 3 people could probably put together, because like no big budget like AAA studio would ever like think to do this or think it could make enough money to make it work. But because it's a small team, because it's a small group, like they put a lot of passion into it, and it shows in every single part of the game.
Not our audience because they know better, but there's a lot of nerds out there that think gaming is like the worst it's ever been and this and that. And when we talk about big AAA and some of these companies, I get that. But one of the things that's so great about being a gamer today is that the indie scene is just full of some of the best designed, best imagined concepts anyone has ever come up with. And I highly encourage you to try this game among others if you think that video games aren't fun anymore or don't have anything to offer. All I can say is like, just stop playing AAA games if that's the opinion you have, because some of these indies are just blowing it out the water, man. Well, man, I think we've about said all that I want to reveal to the audience, trying to keep some of these spoilers under wrap. Any final thoughts on this one?
No, this is probably one of the best games I've played all year. It's such a great time, and I just recommend it to everybody who has even the slightest interest in tactics games.
In a year of FF7 Rebirth, this might still be my game of the year, and
which is crazy.
It is,
but I get it.
And this also might be my favorite boss battle of all time.
Also crazy, but I get it.
That about wraps up this episode on Suspicious Development's latest indie gem, Tactical Breach Wizards.
As always, you can listen to all of our episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or your favorite podcasting platform. And you can follow us on all social medias at the Games Gone By Podcast.
Signing off for Games Gone By, I'm Adam.
I'm Austin.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.